Epidemics and pandemics are phenomena that have left an indelible mark on the fate of nations and the development of civilizations. From ancient times to the modern era, diseases have claimed millions of lives, redrawn the political map of the world, and forced humanity to adapt. Let's explore the most significant epidemics that have struck the world and how they have shaped our history. Epidemics have always accompanied humanity. They claimed millions of lives, destroyed cities, but at the same time helped us become stronger and advance science. Let's recall the most devastating diseases in history and one story that shows how people retained their humanity in times of crisis. 1. The Plague of Athens, 430 to 426 BCE. The first major epidemic documented in detailed historical accounts. The disease struck Athens during the Peloponnesian War with Sparta. Contemporary descriptions detail symptoms such as high fever, bloody cough, and ulcers. The exact cause remains uncertain, likely typhoid fever or measles. The epidemic wiped out up to a third of the city's population, including the great general Pericles. This event significantly weakened Athens and hastened its defeat in the war. When Athens was besieged by the Spartans, a terrifying disease broke out in the city. People died from fever, bloody cough, and ulcers. The Greek historian Thucydides, who survived the illness himself, described how moral values deteriorated, people abandoned their loved ones and neglected the sick. However, there were those who risked their lives to help others. Such crises revealed both the worst and the best in human nature. 2. The Plague of Justinian, 541 to 750. This pandemic of bubonic plague was one of the factors leading to the decline of the Eastern Roman Empire. It began during the reign of Emperor Justinian I and spread across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. An estimated 25 to 50 million people perished. The epidemic recurred over 2 centuries, devastating the empire's economy and population. One story is tied to Constantinople, where the plague claimed up to 5,000 lives daily. Emperor Justinian struggled to maintain order, but fear and despair gripped the city. Chronicles describe how monks and ordinary citizens, despite the risk of infection, buried the dead to prevent an even greater catastrophe. Their actions became an example of human resilience. 3. The Black Death, 1347 to 1351. This pandemic left a grim legacy. In Europe, up to half the population perished, but even in these dark times, acts of heroism occurred. For instance, in Italy, a group of monks voluntarily cared for the infected, knowing they might die. Their sacrifice saved hundreds of lives, and their story is still remembered in local chronicles. One of the most devastating pandemics in history, caused by bubonic plague. It originated in Central Asia and spread to Europe via trade routes. The Black Death killed around 75 to 200 million people, wiping out up to half of Europe's population. This event triggered economic crises, labor shortages, and even social changes, including peasant uprisings. 4. Smallpox epidemics, 15th to 18th centuries. Smallpox was one of the deadliest diseases until the invention of the vaccine. It was particularly devastating for indigenous peoples in the Americas, who were exposed to the disease by European colonizers in the 16th century. In some regions, up to 90% of the population died. In Europe, smallpox killed millions annually until Edward Jenner developed the first vaccine in 1796. When Europeans arrived in the New World, they brought with them diseases unknown to the indigenous peoples. Smallpox wiped out up to 90% of the population. However, amidst this tragedy, there were those who sought to help. Missionaries and doctors traveling with expeditions tried to treat indigenous peoples, learning their culture and methods of combating illness. 5. Quarantine measures and the Great Plague of London, 1665. The last major outbreak of plague in Europe occurred in London. The Great Plague of 1665 claimed the lives of around 100,000 people, or a fifth of the city's population. To combat the epidemic, quarantine measures were introduced. The infected were isolated in their homes, which were sealed and marked with a red cross bearing the words, "Lord, have mercy on us." An interesting story comes from the village of Eyam in Derbyshire. When the plague reached the village, its residents made an extraordinary decision to voluntarily quarantine themselves to prevent the spread of the infection. They endured isolation, and out of 350 residents, only about 90 survived. This heroic act became a symbol of self-sacrifice for the greater good. 6. The Spanish flu, 1918 to 1919. This pandemic erupted at the end of World War I. The virus infected around 500 million people, or a third of the world's population. Deaths ranged from 20 to 50 million. The Spanish flu was unusual in that it predominantly affected young and healthy individuals. Wartime conditions limited efforts to combat the disease, but this pandemic spurred the development of international health initiatives. The story of Maria Wilson from the United States is one of the countless tragedies of this pandemic. Maria, a nurse, cared for the sick and contracted the virus. On her deathbed, she urged her friend to continue tending to patients despite the risks. Her example inspired dozens of women to volunteer in hospitals. 7. Asian flu, 1957 to 1958, and Hong Kong flu, 1968 to 1969. Both pandemics were caused by new strains of influenza. The Asian flu claimed around 2 million lives, while the Hong Kong flu took about 1 million. These events highlighted the importance of developing seasonal flu vaccines. AIDS, HIV/AIDS. Since 1981, the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, was identified in 1981. Since then, over 40 million people have died from AIDS. This pandemic hit African countries especially hard. Thanks to modern medications, HIV has become a manageable chronic condition rather than a death sentence. One inspiring story is that of Ryan White, a teenager from the US, who contracted HIV through a blood transfusion. His case became a symbol of the fight against discrimination. As his family faced ostracism and bullying, Ryan became an advocate for the rights of people living with HIV, inspiring society to change its perception of the disease. His efforts improved awareness and accelerated the development of antiretroviral therapies. 9. COVID-19, 2019 to 2023. The modern coronavirus pandemic became the largest in a century. Since its detection in China, the virus has spread worldwide, causing significant social, economic, and political consequences. Lockdowns, mass vaccination campaigns, and advances in medicine helped curb its spread. Modern stories of solidarity also inspire. During the height of the pandemic in Italy, residents confined to their homes would sing and play music from their balconies to support one another. This tradition spread globally, showing that even in isolation, people can find ways to come together. Throughout history, epidemics have tested humanity's resilience, but they've also driven progress and unity. Let's honor the lives lost and remember the lessons learned, so we can face the future with strength and hope. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay safe.